opera that needs no introduction from me, especially as John Deathridge is about to talk you through the huge variety of available recordings. It's Die Zauberflöte, Mozart's Magic Flute, and John begins with period instruments. And I think that might apply to the bird song as well.
That was Kurt Streit singing Pamina in a performance of Mozart's Magic Flute on original instruments with the Drottningholm Court Theatre Orchestra conducted by Arnold Oostman. The recording is available from Lazolier at full price and from Decca at mid-price, though without the accompanying booklet. And you can also get it at budget price from Decca in a 10-CD set along with Oostman's performances of 3 other Mozart operas. The cast is pretty good too, including Sumi Jo as the Queen of the Night and Barbara Bonney as Pamina. And so are the clever sound effects. Tamino plays his magic flute for the first time, mesmerizing the twittering birds, who eventually fall completely silent. I'm only allowed to review currently available recordings of the Magic Flute, so I've got to ignore William Christie's version from Erato, which has now been deleted. But 2 other authentic versions are still available, and they're just as full of exquisite detail. John Eliot Gardner even had Papageno's bells specially constructed by the chamber organ and early keyboard maker Robin Jennings. So let's hear the first time Papageno plays his magic instrument when he uses it to bewitch Monostatos and the slaves.
Wer sie wagt, gewinnt oft viel. Kommt, du schönes Glockenspiel. Lasst die Glöckchen klingen, klingen, dass die Ohren ihnen singen. Das klingt so herrlich, das klingt so schön. La 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 la. Wie hab ich so etwas gehört und gesehen? La 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 la. Wie hab ich so etwas gehört und gesehen? La 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 la.
Uwe Paper as Monostatos and General Findlay as Papageno, with the Monteverdi Choir and English Baroque soloists conducted by John Eliot Gardner. The Magic Flute was described as a comedy with machines when it first appeared in 1791. Schikaneder wrote the libretto to show off his new theatre in Vienna with its flying contraptions, quickly moving scenery and trapdoors, all of which apparently could be operated at the turn of a wobbly handle without the hordes of technicians and computers necessary in theatres today. The fast, bold anarchy of the staging tended to hide the more serious part of the plot, the age-old question going back to the Greeks about whether human existence is real or unreal, compared with the eternal truth of some higher power. But behind the spectacle, the question was plain to everyone, and directly related to the illusion Schikaneder set out to create. Few understand better than Gardner that the mechanics of the theatre are part of the plot of the Magic Flute. His version comes on the archive label at full price and is one of the best available. But in matters of detail and sheer dogged research, even he's been outdone by Roger Norrington, who's recorded the most complete version of the opera to date, with many of its original theatrical effects intact. Let's hear Papageno's bells again. Mozart specifically asked for keyboard instruments with metal bars struck by hammers, or what he described in his score as an instrument of steel. Schikaneder's stage directions call it a machine, and even more vividly, steely laughter, stählernes Gelächter, which is exactly how Norrington makes it sound.
Ein Mädchen oder Weibchen wünscht Papageno sie. Oh, so ein sanftes Täubchen, wär Seligkeit für mich, wär Seligkeit für mich, wär Seligkeit für mich. Dann schmeckte mir Trinken und Essen, dann könnte ich mit Fürsten mich messen, des Lebens als Weiser mich freuen und wie im Elysium sein. Dann könnte ich mit Fürsten mich messen, des Lebens als Weiser mich freuen und wie im Elysium sein. Im Elysium sein, im Elysium sein.
Andreas Schmidt has a lonely Papageno pining for a sweetheart, with the London Classical Players conducted by Roger Norrington, that recording on Virgin. Mozart knew that creating beautiful sounds out of inanimate musical objects had good dramatic potential, especially in an opera about human frailty. And he just had lots of practice with some marvellous pieces for glass harmonica and mechanical organ. That's one reason why Gardner and Norrington refused to go along with the 19th century practice of sentimentalizing Papageno's bells by playing them on the soft-toned celesta, familiar from Tchaikovsky's music for the Sugar Plum Fairy. The whole point is the stark contrast between Papageno's bumbling humanity and the devastating precision of his magic instrument. Norrington goes against normal practice as well by including all the original dialogue, including the full version of this scene between Papageno and Tamino. Summoned to the Temple of Wisdom by Sarastro, the overblown priest of enlightenment, Papageno insists on staying behind to enjoy his food. He's immediately threatened by 3 of Sarastro's lions, only to be rescued in the nick of time by Tamino's flute.
Ich ginge jetzt nicht fort, und wenn der Herr Sarastro seine 6 Löwen an mich spannte. O Barmherzigkeit, ihr gütigen Götter! Tamino, rette mich! Die Herren Löwen machen eine Mahlzeit aus mir!
Papageno in dire straits. Sarastro's lions, Pagan, Mitzi and Maisy, appear by courtesy of the Zoological Society of London, at least according to the informative booklet that goes with this extremely interesting recording. But there's a snag with all the recorded performances of the Magic Flute on original instruments, and I'm afraid it's a big one. It's simply this: nearly everything is much too fast. Norrington gets through the opera in 138 minutes, a good quarter of an hour ahead of just about everyone else. And the main reason seems to be Mozart's enthusiastic letter to his wife after attending a sold-out performance of the opera in October 1791. The performance began at 7 o'clock, and Mozart headed his letter with the words 10:30 in the evening. Allowing for an interval, 3 encores, general chit-chat, and the fact that Mozart had to walk about a mile back to his house, scholars have concluded that the performance must have been swiftly paced, which is fair enough. But was it really as fast as Norrington conducts it? And did Mozart and Schikaneder insist on doing everything, including all the dialogue? No one really knows. Still, this almost naive reverence for authenticity isn't nearly as bad as the unbearable stuffiness of most of the traditional recordings. Karajan's 1980 version on Deutsche Grammophon, Colin Davis's with Phillips, Neville Mariner's also with Phillips, Haitink's on EMI, and both of Scholtes for Decca are all dogged by funereal tempi, an odd lack of dramatic momentum, and even more strangely, mostly star-studded casts that never seem to shine quite as well as they should do. No wonder Thomas Beecham's wonderfully luminous recording without dialogue from the late 1930s has survived as long as it has. Here's Tamino and his flute again, sung this time by the brilliant Danish tenor Helge Roswenger.
Ist nicht dein Zauberton, weil holde Flöte durch dein Spielen, selbst bildet ihre Freude fühlen. Wie stark ist nicht dein Zauberton, weil holde Flöte durch dein Spielen, holde Flöte.
Beecham's version is exceptionally well cast, despite the fact that he originally wanted Richard Tauber for Tamino and Alexander Kipnis for Sarastro, both of whom were Jewish and for obvious reasons couldn't risk going to Berlin for the recording sessions in 1937. Beecham's flexible tempi also give the performance great presence. The original Tamino, Benedict Schack, was a flautist and could well have played the magic flute himself between the phrases of his song, which must have meant a more measured tempo to get from voice to instrument and back again. If it did happen that way, it must have fitted well with the mixture of improvisation and precision that apparently made the first performances of the opera such a huge success. I sense this quality in Beecham's reading too, which is why it's so memorable. When Walter Legg first put the recording on the market in Germany, its shellac pressings were packed into 3 hefty albums, holding 1978s in all, and cost the princely sum of 111 Reichmarks. It wasn't exactly art for the people, but now you can get it digitally remastered on 2 featherweight CDs in the Dutton Essential Archive series at budget price, and it's a real bargain. The 2 first LP recordings from the early 1950s are also high on my list, and they prove that the issue of fast versus slow tempi in the magic flute isn't just an invention of the authenticity movement. First, let's hear an extract from Ferenc Fricsay's version on Deutsche Grammophon.
Sie wirkt im Kreise der Natur, ihr hohes Lied zeigt deutlich an, nichts anderes sei als Weib und Mann, nichts anderes sei als Weib und Mann. Mann und Weib und Mann reichen die Gottheit an. Mann und Weib und Weib und Mann reichen die Gottheit an. Die Gottheit
Maria Stade and Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau in Pamina's and Papageno's famous duet about the nobility of love, with the RIAS Symphony Orchestra Berlin, conducted by Ferenc Fricsay. Fricsay's tempo sounds fast, but it's perfectly in keeping with Mozart's marking of andantino. Anything much slower makes the piece sound like a love duet, which it certainly isn't. Pamina has yet to find her Tamino, and Papageno certainly hasn't found Papagena. Not that you'd think so from Karajan's more sluggish reading in his early 1950 EMI recording. Even the words are mysteriously changed to mean that woman and man strive for God. Weib und Mann reichen dann an Gott heran. That may sound okay in church, but not in an opera insisting that woman and man are themselves divine, mortals are equal to gods, and heaven is on earth.
Mann und Weib und Weib und Mann reichen dann an Gott heran. Mann und Weib und Weib und Mann reichen dann an Gott heran.
Irmgard Seyfried and Erich Kunz. Karajan coaxes some fine playing from the Vienna Philharmonic, and he has a fine Tamino in Anton der Motor. But the whole thing is spoilt by the vocal reticence of Seyfried, who makes Pamina sound at times like a passive, eyelash-fluttering mannequin. Wilma Lipp is also disappointing as the Queen of the Night, and not nearly as good as Rita Streich in the Fricsay recording, who delivers her high notes tenderly, but always with steel-like precision. In this aria, the Queen of the Night is benign. She offers Tamino comfort and asks if he can rescue her daughter, Pamina, from the clutches of her rival Sarastro. But in her second aria, she's a demon, furious that Tamino has gone over to Sarastro's side. Scholars often have trouble with the sudden, seemingly illogical change in her character, but audiences never do. Tamino has been told by Sarastro's priest that the Queen is a gossip and a malign good-for-nothing, and he believes it. So does the audience. When she appears again, she behaves exactly as they expect. But for conductors, casting the Queen of the Night is a real problem. Mozart lent her voice great tenderness, but also high drama and the hard brilliance of a mechanical object. In a way, every performance needs at least 3 different singers to cover the Queen's full dramatic and vocal range. But conductors can only choose one, and she only has 2 arias anyway, which is why her performance alone can make or break a production. Only 3 singers in the current recordings of the opera are really up to the role's huge demands. We've heard one already, Rita Streich. Now here's another.
So
That was Edda Moser in superb form as the Queen of the Night, and just as superbly angry. She practically spits out her words at the start, then she turns her dazzling vocal acrobatics into a kind of infernal machine. It's hard to beat, and the rest of the performance in this HMV Classics recording is pretty good too. Wolfgang Amadeus conducts the Bavarian State Opera Orchestra with a cast studded with famous names, including Peter Schreier as Tamino, Kurt Moll as Sarastro, and even Brigitte Fassbender in the minor part of the Third Lady. But it's all too loud. That's fine when the Queen of the Night is in a rage, but not in the opera's introspective moments, or in most of the dialogue, which for most of the time sounds like a boisterous romp at the Munich Oktoberfest. The justly famous EMI recording produced by Walter Legg in 1964 with Otto Klemperer and the Philharmonia Orchestra has an even better cast. Listening to it again, I was struck by the vitality of Klemperer's tempi. They're on the slow side, to be sure, but they're never dead. The performance also doesn't make the fatal mistake of piling great voices together simply to increase the decibel count, and presumably the record company's profits. Great voices inhabit the minor roles in this flute, as they do in Savalish's version, but so do fine-tuned ensemble and sensitive phrasing, as you can hear in this marvellous extract, where the three ladies, sung here by Elisabeth Schwarzkopf, Christa Ludwig and Marga Höfgen, present Papageno with his chime of steel bells.
Nun, ihr schönen Frauenzimmer, darf ich so empfehle ich mich. Ich empfehle, kannst du immer, doch bestimmt die Fürstin dich, mit dem Prinzen unverheilen, was Lastlosburg zu eilen. Nein, dafür bedank ich mich, von euch selber hörte ich, dass er wie ein Tigertier sicher ließ von einem Knall, bis er das Rumprat, setzte mich in Hundenmühl. Ich will's dir nicht so wieder, dafür sollst du sein Diener sein, dass doch der Prinz mein Teufel wäre. Mein Leben ist mir lieb, aber wenn es schleicht bei meiner Ehre, er von mir wie ein Dieb. Mir nimm dies Kleidung nicht ist dein. Ein, was mag darinnen sein? Darinnen hörst du Glöckchentöne, für die sie auch wohl spielen können. Oh, ganz gewiss, ja, gewiss. Zauberflöte, Zauberflöte, sie so alte Schussverhältnis. Leben wohl, wir wollen gehen. Leben wohl auf Wiedersehen. Leben wohl auf Wiedersehen. Noch schöne Damen sagen an, wie man die Burg wohl finden kann. Wie man die Burg wohl finden kann. Wie man die Burg wohl finden kann.
Walter Berry as Papageno and Nikolai Gedda as Tamino, reluctantly taking their leave from the three ladies. Great voices and well-grounded tempi are two strengths of another recording made in 1964, this time with Carl Böhm and the Berlin Philharmonic. What an annus mirabilis for the Magic Flute 1964 was. The star of Böhm's version is Fritz Wunderlich, who steers the difficult role of Tamino through its various rites of passage with fine intelligence. Here he is in that awkward scene in the first act, where Tamino comes to the door of the Temple of Wisdom, looking for Pamina, only to be confronted by an old priest who proceeds to interrogate him about his motives. And it's the old priest, sung here by Hans Hotter, who explains to him who Sarastro is, the supreme master of the temple. At which point, stung by a rare moment of insight, Tamino complains that it's all hocus-pocus, hypocrisy, deceit.
nicht finde. Sarastro herrscht in diesen Gründen. Ja, Sarastro herrschet hier. Doch in dem Weisheitstempel nicht. Hier herrscht im Weisheitstempel hier. So ist denn alles Heuchelei. Willst du schon wieder?
Hans Hotter and Fritz Wunderlich. There's something heartrending about this meeting of two unforgettable voices, the one coming to the end of a long, illustrious career, the other nearly at the end of a tragically short one. Wunderlich died 2 years later, aged only 36, and the recording still stands as a sad memorial to one of his most outstanding roles. The other memorable performance in this recording is Franz Krass as Sarastro. Sporting 6 lions to draw his chariot, counting hunting among his favourite hobbies, keeping black slaves, one of whom he accuses of having a soul as dark as his face, and last but not least the insistence of his priests that woman's wiles have sown confusion in Tamino's mind, Sarastro hardly comes across as politically correct, even by late 18th century standards. The truth is, of course, that Mozart and Schikaneder deliberately exaggerated his pompousness for theatrical effect. It's hard to make him sound human, because he probably wasn't meant to be entirely that in the first place. But in the second verse of his rather stiff aria about human reconciliation, Franz Krass almost succeeds.
In diesen heiligen Mauern, wo Mensch den Menschen liebt, kann kein Verräter lauern, weil man dem Feind vergibt. Wen sollte Lehren niederfreuen, verdienet nicht ein Mensch zu sein. Wen sollte Lehren niederfreuen, verdienet nicht ein Mensch zu sein. Wen sollte Lehren niederfreuen, verdienet nicht ein Mensch zu sein. Ein Mensch zu sein.
Franz Krass. This recording from Deutsche Grammophon with Carl Böhm at the helm unfortunately doesn't make it to my shortlist. The women's roles are dangerously undercast, especially Evelyn Lear as Pamina, and some of Böhm's tempi, though absolutely secure, amount to serious misreadings of the score. Mozart clearly marked the chorale prelude with the 2 men in armour as 2 in a bar, but Böhm, and he's not the only one, insists on a pedantic 4 beats to a bar instead. Coupled with the fact that the passage is sung here by 2 heavyweight singers, it's burdensome listening by any standard. In any case, it's not dramatically appropriate. The men are telling Tamino that he who walks the difficult path through fire, water, air and earth will overcome the fear of death and gain illumination. But Tamino knows he still has a choice as he listens to the music, though you'd never guess from the garishly authoritarian way Böhm conducts it. James King and Marty Talvela as the two armed men with the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra conducted by Karl Böhm. Faced with this musical wall of uncompromising severity, Pamina is unlikely to come to a calm decision about giving up his fear of death. Charles Mackerras understands the subtleties of the passage much better in an unpretentious performance from Telarc on modern instruments with the Scottish Chamber Orchestra. This one does go on my shortlist. The action moves swiftly, for most of the time without souped-up tempi. And for once, the pacing of the armed men's chorale is alive, convincing us that Tamino makes his own decision not to fear death, without coercion from anyone else. Peter Svensson and Alistair Miles as the armed men and Jerry Hadley as Tamino. The armed men also allow a woman, Pamina, to guide Tamino through the elements. That hardly sounds as if the Magic Flute is an anti-feminist drama, and indeed, Pamina's greeting of Tamino in this scene is one of the most moving moments in the opera. It's curiously underplayed in nearly all the recordings I've been discussing, including Klemperer's. But it's the nearest Pamino and Tamino ever get to a love duet, and Mackerras' singers, Barbara Hendricks and Jerry Hadley, play it for all it's worth. Barbara Hendricks and Jerry Hadley. In the end, though, there are some miscalculations in Mackerras' reading that stop me from putting it at the very top. The dialogue is stilted for too much of the time, and it's easy to spot, even if you don't know German, that most of the main characters aren't native speakers. There are obvious dangers, too, in declaiming the spoken text in a studio with no one there except the technicians and the odd lion. There's no sense of fun, nor do the singers feel relaxed enough in getting the niceties of the plot across to the listener. Mackerras has also inherited a few sins from the authenticity movement. Pamina's aria is much too fast, though Barbara Hendricks negotiates the breakneck speed well enough. Again, the idea seems to be based on dodgy evidence. A single witness who reported anonymously to a journal 20 years after the event that this is how he remembered Mozart conducting the piece. I'm not convinced. Barbara Hendricks. In an otherwise stimulating performance of the Magic Flute, Mackerras gets nowhere near the disconcerting melancholy of this aria. Fast tempi can be just as lifeless as slow ones, though it's certainly true that many conductors in the slow lane have also done their best to ruin the aria by trying to preserve it in 19th century aspic. Klemperer is an exception, partly because he chose an amazing singer, Gundula Janowitz, but mainly because neither of them lose sight of the aria's inner sense. Pamina wants to commit suicide because she thinks she's lost Tamino. She yearns for peace in death, and in an astonishing passage near the end of the aria, Janowitz captures her black despair exactly with almost unbearable intensity. It's one of the most moving performances of the aria ever recorded. Gundula Janowitz. Klemperer's recording has no dialogue. Considering the disasters in this department in many of the current versions, we can probably feel grateful. But if you want a version with dialogue, the choice isn't easy. By far the best is Fricsay's on Deutsche Grammophon, even though the dialogue's far from complete. Fricsay uses professional actors, and personally I feel grateful for that too. If you don't like the idea, you should consider the 1964 Böhm recording or even Sabalish's. A more cogent reason for choosing Fricsay is the musical performance. The cast is strong, including most of the minor parts. Every word is crystal clear, and even though it's in mono and the orchestra sounds at times as if it's playing in someone's upstairs bathroom, the whole recording has a lively presence. That's mainly because of Fricsay's sharp tempi and the astonishing precision of the singing, as you can hear in Papageno's final appearance when he gets his woman at last.
Bist du mir nun ganz ergeben? Oh, will ich dir ganz ergeben? Nun so sei mein liebes Weibchen. Nun so sei mein Herzensteilchen. Mein liebes Weibchen, mein Herzensteilchen. Welche Freude wird das sein? Welche Freude wird das sein? Wenn die Götter uns bedenken. Wenn die Götter uns bedenken. Unsere liebe Kinder schenken. Unsere liebe Kinder schenken. So liebe kleine Kinderlein, Kinderlein. Kinderlein, Kinderlein, so liebe kleine Kinderlein, so liebe kleine Kinderlein. Papageno.
Nein, eine kleine Papageno.
Dann wieder eine Papageno.
Nein, wieder eine Papageno.
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 Papageno. Papageno.
Es ist das höchste der Gefühle.
Es ist das höchste der Gefühle. Es ist das höchste der Gefühle.
Es ist das höchste der Gefühle.
Papageno and Papagena, sung by Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau and Lisa Otto, with the RIAS Symphony Orchestra of Berlin, conducted by Ferenc Fricsay. But my final choice has to be Klemperer. Fricsay may capture Mozart's interest in music that has machine-like precision while sounding intensely human at the same time, and his pacing is agile without being superficial. But Klemperer manages to penetrate quite another level of this marvellous score in a way that's still unsurpassed. In a way, he's turning fabulous voices into abstract symphonic music, dehumanizing them if you like. But those voices are so powerful that they win out in the end, just as Mozart would have wanted. I promised a third Queen of the Night, and here she is, Lucia Popp, the best of them all.
The voice that for John Deathridge can make or break a performance of Mozart's Magic Flute, the Queen of the Night, and Lucia Popp is the best of the lot as far as he's concerned. And that's his Building a Library recommendation, Klemperer and the Philharmonia, a Walter Legg production for EMI back in 1964 with Janowitz, Popp, Gedder and Berry, and Elisabeth Schwarzkopf and Christa Ludwig as first and second ladies. If you want the dialogue, it won't do, but otherwise it's an excellent deal these days, remastered at mid-price in EMI's Great Recordings of the Century series, so you should find it for under £20. If you want all the words, though, dialogue as well as sung texts, then John Deathridge has two recommendations, both mid-price, both from Deutsche Grammophon, both in Berlin. First, the mono Fricsay recording from 1954, where the spoken dialogue is taken by actors. Or, in stereo, there's Carl Böhm, a decade later, 1964, now reissued as a DG original.